Hello and welcome to Battlefield 1 News, and today we have the patch notes for the Giant Shadow update, which is coming tomorrow, the 13th of December. So in this video I'm going to take you through the patch notes, see what changes have been made and see what's coming up. So these patch notes are provided by Alexander Hansen, Eric Ortmon, Alan Kurtz, Steve Lynn and Randy Santon. And the first thing, of course, in the patch notes is the release of Giant Shadow. Now, this map is available on the 13th if you pre-ordered or have premium. If you don't, you just have Battlefield 1, then this is going to be available on the 20th. This map seems to follow DICE's new pattern of being fairly linear. Now, C and D are next to each other rather in a straight line, but as you can see, you've got A, B, E and F. This is a fairly similar layout to Amiens, I would suggest. As for the actual terrain, well, we've seen this map before in the single player in Mud and Blood. So though we have a similar flag layout to Amiens, we've actually got much more open terrain, and then we have the airship and the railway lines and the buildings more concentrated in the middle of the map. Also arriving with this DLC is the grenade crossbow. This is a sport class gadget that can fire 2 grenades. You either get 2 frag grenades or 2 HE grenades depending on which one you pick, and this isn't really going to help the grenade spam within the game. Making a welcome return is spectator mode. So we did see spectator mode earlier on in Battlefield 1's life, but then it disappeared for the release. Now it's coming back, so you can do third person views, first person views from individual characters, you can be a free floating camera, and basically you can look around the battlefield however you want. Now I know this isn't particularly useful for a lot of people. You can use it if you suspect somebody's cheating to actually monitor what they're doing. Other than that, it's good for filming cinematics or having a look at maps from an overhead view, but other than that, for most people it's not really very practical or useful. But it is nice to have it back because you can get much more atmospheric Battlefield 1 videos with spectator mode. Next feature listed is a new custom game setting called Standard Issue Rifles. Now this isn't a game mode, as in you can't go in and play it, but what it is a setting for rental servers. So you can, as the owner of a server, issue standard issue rifles to all classes within the game. So that means assault, medic and support would be able to use bolt action rifles. Now they will only be able to use the base version of the rifle and only the rifle for the country that they're playing. So if you're playing the British, you'll be able to use the basic version of the SMLE. So you're not going to get any scopes, you're just going to get the standard infantry version. The reason why this setting is exciting is of course you could restrict all the other guns in the game, and therefore every soldier in the game would either have a basic infantry rifle or they would be a sniper who's also got the bolt actions. So this new server setting will allow for a more World War I feeling experience. Next we have soldier movement, and most of this is fixes to bugs that were in the movement system. So now if you're crouched or prone, you will be able to instantly get up and sprint rather than having the strange delay there was before. And if you're sprinting and then zoom in, you'll drop out of sprint, but then when you stop zooming in you'll be able to sprint again. Before there was a problem with that as well. Aim assist has been tweaked to make it less automatic, so now you'll actually have to put in controller input to get aim assist to work. So rather than somebody just going past where you're aiming and then the aim assist locking onto them, you will now actually have to move the controller and the crosshairs around to actually get aim assist on a target. Next we move on to vehicle fixes and changes, and the first of these is vehicle deployment. You should no longer spawn in without a vehicle. So this happened quite a few times. You'd select a tank, you'd spawn into the game as a tanker, but you wouldn't have a tank. Or you'd select your tank, you'd spawn in, but you'd be a cavalry officer driving a tank. All of these problems should now be fixed. The landship has seen some major changes, and it's about time. In the real world, the heavy tank was awful. It was just bad, and the landship was the tank that actually made a difference on the battlefield. In Battlefield 1, the heavy tank is unrealistically good, and the landship was just bad. Nobody used it, so they've tweaked it. What they've done is allowed people to spawn into the landship, So if the landship had already spawned and was driving around the battlefield, you couldn't spawn into it as a player. You couldn't jump into one of the empty seats because it didn't have that ability. Now the landship can be used as a spawn point. You can jump into an empty seat on the landship if there's one available. They've increased the armour of the landship, so it's now exactly the same as the heavy tank, and they've adjusted the repair system. So when you hit 3 on PC, you get that instant repair on the heavy tank and landship. Well, now on the heavy tank, that will only repair 20% of the damage, not 30%, and on the landship it will repair 25% of the damage. There are a few other changes to landship, but they come later in the patch notes. Next section is air vehicles, and most of these changes are around the fighter. So the fighter's ground attack weapons, the rank and darts, have been nerfed, so you can't really use them in an air-to-air role anymore. But the fighter's machine guns have had a buff, and bombers have had a nerf, so they'll take more damage from those machine guns. The rear gunners in bombers and attack planes are now going to do less damage, so this means that fighters now have the advantage when it comes to air-to-air combat, like they should have. Vehicle head glitching has been fixed. So if you were in first person view in a tank and you were trying to shoot over a wall, you wouldn't be able to see over the wall. But if you switched to third person view, then the aim point shifted from the actual gun to where you were looking from. And weirdly then you could shoot over the wall while your tank was completely hidden. This has now been fixed. The third person view shots come from the gun the same as they do in first person view. Here is the detailed list of changes. The tank Gewehr now does 160 to 180 damage, and this is both for the landship and tank hunter versions. So tank hunters are now going to make more of an impact. It doesn't do any more damage against airplanes, so you're still not going to be an anti-aircraft gun. The landship mortars have had their range increased slightly, and the mortar landship now has 5 seats. It's got 2 extra light machine gunners on the side. So you now have a 5-seat landship that people can spawn into, making the landship a lot better. The squad support version of the landship now has a 20mm cannon in the front and not an LMG. This is a big buff for the landship because it means the driver has the same kind of power as the light flanker tank. Okay, he hasn't got a turret, but he can damage infantry and vehicles really effectively. The landship takes the same damage as the heavy tank. The heavy tank's emergency repairs have dropped from 30 to 20%. On the landship, track repairs now do 20%, and the emergency repairs now do 25%. Case shells now do 50% less damage against planes. Stationary AA guns have had their range reduced to 334 meters. Inconsistent damage for plane rockets has been fixed, and the damage has been reduced from 120 to 100. The rockets now fly faster, but they don't fly for as long. The rank and dart now does less damage against planes, but bombers take 20% more damage from bullets. The dogfighter and trench fighter machine guns have had their damage increased by 4%, and they now overheat less. They've increased the bomber killer machine gun damage by 3% and decreased the airship killer machine gun damage by 18%. The tailgunners machine guns have had a real nerf. They've dropped by 23% damage at long ranges and 42% damage at close ranges, and they've sped up the damage drop off slightly, so those are now going to be a bit more challenging to use. And they reduced the range of the torpedo boat's torpedoes to 400 meters. That's the same range as the Dreadnought's AA guns, so the torpedo boats now shouldn't be able to just sit out of range of those guns and launch torpedoes at the Dreadnought. The Dreadnought should now be able to fire back. That's it for the vehicle changes. I don't fly very much in game, so I can't really comment on the plane changes, but I do really like the tank changes. I think the landship has needed some love. Just the fact that people can now spawn into the landship means you can actually get gunners in your landship. In fact, it's also received a few other buffs, and the heavy tank has had its emergency repair nerfed, are all good changes. Now we come to the weapon changes, and the biggest thing in here is shotguns, because the Model 10A Hunter and Factory have had a range nerf. To do this, they've reduced the buckshot range for the M97 trench gun, the Model 10A and the sawn-off shotgun. So the range at which these 3 guns can one-shot kill has been reduced. To make up for this a bit, the M97 has had an extra pellet added to all variants, so that slightly improves its damage. Now, backboard shotguns have had their range improved. These give you better recoil, but it seems that DICE thought that they did that at the penalty of not enough range. And they've increased the accuracy of the 12 gauge automatic so that users can, and I quote, make more use of its higher rate of fire effectively. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And they've also tweaked the crosshairs of the shotguns to make it easier for you to land damage consistently. Whatever that means, we'll have to wait and see tomorrow. Now, of course, we haven't tried any of these changes yet, but reading through them, it seems to me that all the shotguns are going to be pretty much the same. They tried making them all unique and giving them more unique properties, and unfortunately that just made some better than others. So now some have had their ranges reduced, some have had their ranges increased, some have had an extra pellet of damage added, so it seems that they're all going to be much of a muchness, and it's only the more extreme variants that are going to change the shotguns. Next we have some changes to LMGs, and what they've done is made them less inaccurate when you start shooting. So if you fire an LMG in full auto, the first few shots that you fire are the least accurate shots. Then the gun settles down and you can fire accurately. What they've decided is those least accurate shots just weren't accurate enough. So they've changed the recoil of the second shot to be the same as what the recoil was for its optical version. The optical versions were always better when aimed down sights. Now if you're aiming with any version of an LMG, you're going to get the same recoil pattern as if you would with the optical. So that there is still an advantage to using the optical version, they now have less side-to-side recoil. That's been reduced for the optical versions, and that horrible vertical recoil and inaccuracy has been reduced for all versions. They're still not as accurate as they are once you've got into sustained fire, but you will now be able to hit the side of a barn with one. And finally for the LMGs, their reload times have been altered to match their reload animations. So some reloads have become faster, some reloads have become slower. Bayoneting, and you will now be able to use your bayonet when there's no ammo in your gun. I had never come across this bug, but apparently if there was no ammo in your gun, you couldn't initiate a bayonet charge. Now you can, and you can interrupt a reload to bayonet charge as well. Right, so let's get down into the nitty gritty of these weapon changes. They've reduced the reload times for the Lewis machine gun down to 2.85 seconds and 4.2 seconds for slow and fast reloads. Slowed down the Lewis machine gun overheat so that it now takes 50 bullets to overheat. Increased the Madison MG fast reload to 2.65 seconds. Reduced the tactical fast time for the BAR to 2.8 seconds. Increased the MG15 reload time to 4.45 seconds. Corrected an error where LMGs and rifles zoomed in too fast when using iron sights and 2 times magnification. Increased the throw velocity of the light anti-tank grenade to be the same as the frag grenade. Improved the accuracy and recoil of the M1903 experimental. Made revolvers and the Howder pistol recover faster from dispersion. Flares no longer set the player on fire immediately after firing them while looking down. So you've probably seen this a lot in videos or seen it yourself. You fire the flare pistol down a hill and for some reason you burst into flames, even though the flare has landed quite a long way away from you. They've reduced the damage of mortar shells hitting an object immediately after firing. This means if you're dumb enough to go behind a wall with your mortar and start firing mortar shells into the wall, it's going to take more of those shells hitting the wall to kill you. The Martini Henry's damage has been fixed, so it would appear that the Martini Henry wasn't taking effect of the 0.9 multiplier for the lower torso and upper arms, or the 0.75 multiplier for the legs and forearms. So basically it was doing maximum damage no matter where you hit somebody. This has now been fixed and those multipliers will take into effect. Martini Henry now resupplies 5 bullets at a time, because it was really annoying running up to an ammo bag if you were using the Martini Henry and it would resupply 1 bullet at a time. Now it's going to do 5, so you should get your ammo faster. They reduced the number 3 revolver's reload time from 2.666666 seconds to 2.3. And they've slightly increased its fire rate from 150 rounds per minute to 164 rounds per minute. They've reduced the repeater pistol M1912's aimed stationary dispersal from 0.4 to 0.3, and they've reduced its horizontal recoil from 0.8 to 0.5. Basically that means the repeater pistol is now a bit more accurate. Now part 2, and the first of these is that the Hellriegel has received a bit of a nerf again. Its first shot recoil multiplier has gone up from 1.8 to 2, and its horizontal recoil has gone from 0.76 to 0.8. So the Hellriegel is slightly harder to control. The MP18 has had its first shot recoil multiplier reduced from 2.1 to 1.8, making it slightly easier to control. They've improved the shotgun crosshair size and scaling. Now, I don't know what this means, but I'm assuming it means that it now more accurately reflects where the pellets are going to go. The sawed-off shotgun now resupplies 4 rounds at a time instead of 2, I think it was before. The 12 gauge automatic's dispersion increase per shot has gone from 0.3 to 0.15. That means it is going to be a bit more accurate while you're firing. There's a couple of fixes for the Model 10A. The Hunter's dispersion model was decreasing too quickly, and the factory's dispersion model was decreasing too slowly. So the Model 10A Hunter is going to be slightly worse than it was before, and the Model 10A Factory is going to be slightly better than it was before. The damage drop-off of the M97 Trench Gun, the M97 Hunter, the Model 10A Factory and the Model 10A Hunter has been changed by 1, which basically makes them slightly worse at range. The post-reload delay of the 12 gauge automatic has been reduced to 0.3. They've improved the hipfire of the M1903 Experimental. The SMGs and LMGs will now use damage curves. So if you've seen a graph previously of the damage model of an LMG or an SMG, it looks like the graph on the left. It was basically straight lines connecting points. Now it's going to look more like the graph on the right, and it's going to be smooth curves transitioning between damage drop-offs. And I know that graph was terrible. I knocked it up really quickly when I just realised it was easier to put a little graph up than it was to try and explain how that worked. The Huot Lewis gun, the M1909 and the BAR have had their minimum damage increased from 21 to 23. LMG damage drop-off happens at farther distances. Reduce the effect of suppression on LMG's vertical recoil. Changed LMG based ADS dispersion increase per shot from 0.12 to 0.085, so they are slightly more accurate on the first shots. They reduced the Lewis gun's horizontal recoil from 0.36 to 0.34. The Huot's horizontal recoil has been halved from 0.32 to 0.16, so that might actually be a bit more useful. The M1909's horizontal recoil has been reduced from 0.3 to 0.24. And some more guns have had their post-reload delays set to match the animations better. That's the Gewehr 98, the SMLE and the M1903. So those are the weapon changes from this patch. We've seen a much needed nerf to the Model 10A Hunter. It's going to be interesting to see what the other changes they made to shotguns do. It's nice to see that the LMGs have had a substantial buff really, so they're going to be more usable. And it's interesting to see if anybody's going to use the Martini Henry now that its damage has been fixed. And now we're almost through the majority of these changes. We get on to gadgets, and they've reduced the inaccuracy period of the mortar. So the mortar had a 4 or 5 second period where you had to wait for it to zoom in and become accurate. They reduced that time because it was just too much, and basically nobody used the mortar anymore. And the recovery time between shots has been changed as well, so you can now put more sustained fire more accurately. This means, as they say here, you will be able to hit a tank with multiple rounds, whereas before you just couldn't hit anything. You were just bombarding an area if you wanted to try and get some damage down quickly. Now we get to the Revive syringe, and they've added a short cooldown between syringe uses and added the ability to ignore this cooldown if near an ammo crate. Now we all know that the revive system needs looking at. If you want to try and get somebody up off the ground, it's pretty much instantaneous. If you actually want to damage somebody with a syringe, you've got to prepare it and wait. So I think I would have just preferred the idea that syringe took longer to use rather than there being a cooldown in between it, because at the moment you can just run up to somebody and stab them and they're instantly better on 100% health. Now you're still going to have that situation across multiple people if somebody's dropped an ammo crate. So if you're defending and there's an ammo crate down, you can still run around and just stab people to your heart's content and they'll get up on 100% health. Not sure this is the solution to this problem. There have been some changes to ammo and medical crates. They're basically going to stay around longer, resupplying more, and they're going to be easier to put down. I don't know if you've seen it at the moment, but you can throw down an ammo crate, you'll get the message saying that your ammo crate's down, you'll get other people nearby saying thank you, but there's no ammo crate on the ground because the ground is slightly too uneven for the ammo crate. Now if it is blocked, it will try and put it at your feet. Explosive icons. They've updated the icons for explosives in the world, so you should be able to tell if they're friendly or enemy explosives. And they've also adjusted the scaling on explosive icons and those for crates for the medic and support players so that they don't become quite so large and obstructive when you get close to them. And yes folks, we're almost there. We've nearly made it to the end. Next we have hardcore mode. So a lot of people have been complaining about hardcore mode, how they really didn't like it, and it wasn't a reflection of hardcore modes that we've had in the past. So they've made some changes to it. The biggest one of these is that damage has now been reduced in hardcore from 200% damage to 125% damage. Now this has been done to stop the bolt action rifles being one-shot kills at no matter what range and no matter what part of the body they hit. So snipers are going to have to be a bit more accurate and a bit more discerning in hardcore mode from now on. They've also changed things like bits of the UI interface so that soldiers would have the information that they would have in the real world. So you can look on a map, but you can't see where people are on it. You can have a rough idea of how much ammo and how many grenades you've got left, but not necessarily how many bullets you've got in your magazine right now. What they want is for hardcore to be a more realistic version of Battlefield 1. So that means that damage models and what UI you can use and see is trying to reflect that. So hopefully this will be a bit better. I'll try it out now and see if I actually like it. Right, so that's it for this look at the Giant Shadow patch notes. Now the patch notes don't end here. There are pages of UI tweaks and bug fixes and all those little changes and fixes that make the game better but don't necessarily change your experience of the game. What I've covered in these patch notes is basically everything that changes how you play the game. Not necessarily that a certain rock on a certain map will no longer trip you up. So I hope this has helped you understand what's coming. Thanks for watching.